It's the fantasy football playoffs. Which players are going to emerge off this week's waiver wire to help carry you to a championship? That's the conversation we have every week with SI senior fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano. And Fabs, it's always wild this time of year, right? You got the end of the fantasy regular season, playoff start. The pressure is on, but yet the waiver wire still comes in handy. So let's go over the positions or the players that you have to pick up this week, starting with quarterbacks.
Yeah, beam me up, Scotty. Captain Kirk Cousins, a very good performance once again. He was on this list last week. Gave you over 21 fantasy points in an overtime win over the Jaguars. He's now scored 20-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. He's got the Bucs coming up, Bill, but that could be a high-scoring affair. Next up, Baker Mayfield. That's right. I was completely wrong about this game. I thought Tennessee would win. It did not happen. Cleveland absolutely dominated Baker. 4 touchdown passes in the first half, nearly 30 fantasy points. He has 6 touchdown passes and no interceptions in his last 2 games. Now, in week 14, he's got the Ravens. That's not a great matchup. After that, he's got 2 road games against the New York teams, the Giants and the Jets. So maybe you don't start Baker in week 14, but he could potentially help you down the line in the fantasy postseason. Some other quarterbacks that you can add. Derek Carr, remember I told you that it's a week-to-week league? Well, he had a big game against the Jets, and that was a very strange call at the end of that game. Nonetheless, Phillip Rivers, Teddy Bridgewater, Tua Tagovailoa, and Jalen Hurts, who might end up being the starting quarterback for the Eagles next week, all in play off the waiver wire among quarterbacks.
Let's move over to the running back position. Who are you eyeing up?
Same guy had first on this list last week, Cam Akers. And he had 22 touches. A very good game against the Arizona Cardinals. A 32% touch share. We needed that. Scored a touchdown for the 3rd straight week. I don't know if he has taken hold of the top spot here, but it sure looked like it against Arizona. He's got the Patriots coming up in week 14. And then Adrian Peterson, we go from young to old. And Peterson had 2 touchdowns this week. He's now had 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games. And the next matchup is Green Bay. And they are bad against running backs. If DeAndre Swift can't come back, so keep tabs on the rookie status, if he is out again, Adrian Peterson is in the mix as a potential flex starter. Going back to the Jets, Ty Johnson, right? Not the best running back in the National Football League, but the Raiders sure made him look pretty good. He had 24 touches, a 50% touch share, over 100-yard scrimmage, a touchdown, and nearly 20 fantasy points. And now you've got to think Frank Gore, being 37 years old, coming off a concussion, maybe he doesn't play in week 14. Ty Johnson would be the starter against Seattle. I'm not saying he's a must start. He's probably a flex starter in a 12 or 14 team league, but when a running back is available now who could potentially start for any NFL team, including the Jets, I guess they are an NFL team, he's going to be worth a look off the wire.
Let's go over to wide receiver. Baker Mayfield had a big game. I know a few of his receivers popped off in week 13 as well.
Yeah, that's right. And we can start off here with Rashad Higgins of the Cleveland Browns, who's only owned in about 3% of leagues right now. He had 9 targets, 6 catches, 95 yards, over 21 fantasy points against the Titans. He's second among Browns wide receivers in target share over the last 2 weeks, of course, behind Jarvis Landry. Now, once again, same situation as with Mayfield. Bad matchup in week 14, but he's got the 2 New York teams in week 15 and 16. Let's move on to T.Y. Hilton. He was my top guy last week. Some guys just dominate teams during their careers, and T.Y. Hilton dominates the Houston Texans, and he had a big game this week, 11 targets, 8 catches, 25 fantasy points against Houston. He has a 21% target share in the last 2 weeks. He's averaging over 21 points per game, and he's got the Raiders coming up next. It's a really good matchup, so T.Y. Is back in our good graces. And how about Kiki QT? Another player we told you to pick up last week, still widely available on waiver wires. He had 9 targets, 8 catches, 141 yards, and over 22 fantasy points against the Colts. He had a 24.3% target share. That was more than Brandon Cooks. The matchup isn't great in week 14 against Chicago, but Kiki still worth a look. And some other guys in deeper leagues, and I emphasize deeper leagues, Laviska Shenault, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Chad Hansen, all worth a look.
All right, let's close it out with tight ends. Anyone there worth picking up?
It's a little thin, my friend. It's a little thin. I will go with Anthony Fursker, who had 7 targets, 5 catches, and over 10 fantasy points against the Browns. Jonnu Smith missed the game with a knee injury. If he can't play in week 14, well, Furster's got the Jaguars, and that's a really good matchup. So he could be worth a look off the wire. Some other tight ends to pick up for the desperate. Gerald Everett, Dan Arnold had a couple of touchdowns for the Cardinals. Tyler Eifert, remember him? Drew Sample, and maybe even Cole Kmet in deeper fantasy leagues. It's week 14, Bill. There's not much out there at tight end.
Cole Kmet, the rookie for the Bears, did get into the end zone in week 13. Great list as always, Fabs. And we have plenty more fantasy football advice for the postseason. Michael Fabiano, you have your Stardom Cinema coming out, your PPR rankings. All of that can be found on si.com/fantasy.